Thank you, Jay, and good afternoon, everyone. There was a pregnant pause before I said anything there, so let's try that again. I am going to try and make this interactive as we go through the materials here. I will be pulling you into the conversation, and I will have time at the end for Q&A, so we do need people to provide cues when I ask for it. So let's try that again. Good afternoon, everyone. A very trainable, malleable audience. I like that a lot. Well, I am thrilled to be here. I've been in the innovation field by my count for about 18 years now, and I've spoken at a few Google events, but I've never actually been inside a Google campus, which I find rather astonishing. So today is my first day. Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to share with you some of our thoughts about leadership lessons from the trenches of disruption. The way I decided to organize today's remarks is in 5 acts. Act 1 is the origin story. This starts with contemplating a question that I ask people to think about all the time. If a young person asks you, what should I do if I want to change the world? How do you respond? I asked you who came to this event to answer this question, and I've asked now about 2,000 people around the world this question over the last few years. What kind of responses do people give? Well, the dominant response today is to start a company. Almost 40% of the people that I've asked this question to give that as their answer. And 50% of you said the same thing. That is the perception that people have. You do what Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak and Larry and Sergey and others did. You go and create a new company. Become a teacher is another popular answer. Almost 30% of people say that. Go and join a not-for-profit comes in third in the poll, with 17% of people saying this is the path to go and change the world. We're left with 2 at the bottom of the barrel. Either join a great big company or enter public service. I am sad to report that public service is the lowest ranked response in my survey. It used to be a little bit higher, but it's declined pretty sharply over the past couple years. I can't think of any global events that would lead to that happening. But now only 8% of people say this is what you do if you want to change the world. But I want to look at this number for just a second. Only 9% of people say do what you have all done. Google today, of course, is not a startup company. It is a great big global giant. People say this is not the path that you should follow if you want to change the world. I thought this. The reason I moved out to Singapore in 2010 wasn't to take the consulting business that I'd helped build in the United States and bring it to Southeast Asia. No, I was going to leave that part of our business behind where we advise great big companies on how they can navigate disruptive change and join a sister company that we had set up called Innosight Ventures, whose intent was to invest in and incubate startup companies. Because after all, I wanted to change the world, and that's what you do, right? You enter the entrepreneurial ecosystem. Well, in October 2010, I had a paired set of experiences that showed me I had framed the problem incorrectly. That, in fact, the best thing to do if you want to change the world is to do exactly what you have done and join a great big company. I call this the parable of Plunify and the might of the multinational. Let me start with Plunify. Plunify was a startup company that pitched us for funding in October 2010. The details of Plunify don't matter. The important part of the story is it was the first time we were pitched for funding, not with a business plan, but with a business. What's the difference, you ask? Well, a business plan is facts and figures and slides and spreadsheets. A business is customers. A business is a website. A business is actual revenues. The 2 kids pitching for funding had done all this, spending basically $0. This is what the world is like today. You can start a business spending just about nothing. What were we looking for when we were debating whether or not to invest in Plunify? We were looking for what the world today now calls unicorns, privately held companies worth more than $1 billion US. These are incredibly sexy creatures. How sexy, you ask? Well, a couple years ago, the dating app Tinder, which I, as a boring married man with 4 children, have heard about but never used, they released a report that said, what can you do or what occupation can you have to increase the odds that you get a right swipe on Tinder? Here are the results. Look at men first. Number one is pilot. Tom Cruise, Top Gun, always been true. An incredibly sexy profession. Look at what's number two, founder/entrepreneur. Back when I was in the dating pool, if you were to announce that you were a founder or entrepreneur, that's a good way of telling people that you have no job. But today, this is an incredibly desirable profession for both men and for women. So we're out hunting for unicorns. We're considering this investment in Plunify. A couple weeks later, I see a very different kind of beast. I'm now in Durgapur in the eastern part of India, visiting something created by a massive company. This is something created by Medtronic. If you don't know Medtronic, it is the world's largest standalone medical device company. Now, India should have been its leading market. India sadly has more heart disease than any country in the world. One of Medtronic's flagship products is the pacemaker, a device that gets implanted in your chest to regulate the flow of electricity to your heart. But Medtronic's sales in India were minuscule. You spend 5 minutes in India and you understand. Most people pay for healthcare out of their own pocket. A $1,000 device is simply unaffordable to many people in India. Even worse, primary care doesn't work that well in India. You might not know that you need a pacemaker even if you could afford it. Well, Medtronic Truth in Advertising, working with a consulting team at Innosight, came up with an innovative way to crack this problem, not by inventing new technology, but by developing a new business model called Healthy Heart for All. 3 key components to the business model. First, direct-to-consumer marketing like the truck that you see here. Second, rural diagnostic camps, where in an afternoon you could test 300 or 400 people to see if they needed a pacemaker. Third, and most critically, the world's first loan program for an implantable medical device. Think about that for a second. If you go to a bank and take out a loan for something like a car, if you don't pay the bank back, what happens? What does the bank do? They take the car back. They repossess the asset. If you get a loan for a device that gets implanted in your chest and you don't pay the loan back, what does the bank do? Recollection or repossession is a little bit more challenging in those circumstances. But 8 years later, drafting on principles proven in microfinance, community lending, and so on, tens of thousands of people have been through this program. Hundreds of bottom-of-the-pyramid consumers have received loans, and there have been virtually 0 defaults. I came back from Durgapur and thought about these 2 experiences. When you first hear the example of Plunify, if you're inside a large company, you say, what hope do we have? If you can start a business for nothing, how can we compete? Here's the challenge. If you were sitting in a meeting listening to that pitch from Plunify, what would stop you from copying that idea in the market? Nothing. Yes, it's never been easier to start a business, but that also means it's never been easier to copy a business, which means it remains brutally difficult to scale one. Yes, we get the unicorns that emerge out, the Gojeks and the Ubers and the Grabs and so on, but for every one that succeeds, there's hundreds, if not thousands, that fail. Contrast that to Medtronic. I could tell you every single detail of what Medtronic did, every single detail. And what could you do about it? Nothing. You don't have a patent on a pacemaker. You don't have access to all the doctors in India. You don't have the understanding of the market that Medtronic does. There are literally 3 companies in the world that could do what Medtronic did. As I reflected on this, I realized I had framed the problem incorrectly, that in fact, what Medtronic did and what other large companies have done is they have followed this pattern of combining together assets of scale with entrepreneurial energy. That is the path to changing the world. That in fact, large companies that think and act in the right way can be massive agents of change. They can go and confront what our co-founder Clayton Christensen famously called the innovator's dilemma, and they can turn it, like Medtronic did, into the innovator's opportunity. Act 2, the challenge. It's easier said than done. I was giving a speech in Singapore a couple months ago with a number of leaders from big retailers and big consumer packaged goods companies, and I asked them, give me a word to describe what makes it hard to drive innovation and growth in your organization. And you can see this beautiful word cloud that was created. I want to focus on this word right here, inertia. In my mind, this is the biggest challenge for large organizations that are seeking to have impact at scale. And let me illustrate the challenge by telling you a story about one of my children. This is my third child. You'll see others of my children as I go through the presentation today. This is my lovable 6-year-old goofball, Harry. So let me tell you a little bit about Harry. Harry has a father, me, who was born in America. His mother, my wife, Joanne, was born in the UK. Harry was fully manufactured in Singapore. He was born here in 2011. You ask Harry where he is from, he is most likely to respond Mars. That's the kind of kid he is. He's a very creative, very energetic kid. In fact, if you ask him to draw a superhero, he illustrates himself as Captain Creative. Fun-loving kid. His nickname at school is Happy Harry. Everybody loves him. So imagine our surprise about 18 months ago in Singapore. We receive a letter from our condo association describing an incident involving Harry. Here is a copy of the letter. As shared, your children were found vandalizing the flooring at the multi-play court using some materials on 16 October 2016. This being Singapore, of course, the action was captured in the CCTV footage as appended below. What do you think were the materials that Harry, and if you look very closely at the picture, you'll see there are 4 fuzzy images there. Harry, his 2 older siblings, and his father. What do you think were the materials that we were using on the multi-play court? Chalk is correct. It was a Sunday afternoon. The kids were bored out of their minds. They said, can we go downstairs and draw a baseball pitch or diamond on the multi-play court, on the basketball court? I said, sure, why not? No harm, no foul. It's chalk from Smiggle. It's going to go away pretty quickly. Let's go and do it. You see on down here, it is most fortunate that our cleaners have managed to remove the stains on the floor. What do you think actually removed the stains on the floor? Rain. Does it ever rain in Singapore? Every once in a while. An hour after we drew the baseball pitch, the skies opened up, all the chalk was washed away. Yet still here, we received this threatening letter describing the abhorrent behavior of our children. This is what happens to us. We enter the world in a natural state. We are curious and creative when we are born. And then we go to school, and we learn there's a right answer and there's a wrong answer. We go to work in organizations. We learn there's a right way to do things and there's a wrong way to do things. Harry came after this and said, should I not do that anymore? Should I not go play? Should I not experiment? Should I not draw? To which we said, of course, you should continue to do these things. But when you get inside organizations, you have real challenges. You're an executive like this. You know the statistics. Google has published some of these things describing the benefits that come from innovation. You know your shareholder returns will go up. You know psychological safety will increase the performance of teams. You know these are things that you want to do. You dream about being the innovation superhero that can make all of these things happen, but then you deal with the power of inertia. You deal with the existing processes, your metrics, your incentives, your norms, your decision criteria, and your strategy, all of which pull you back to yesterday and make it hard for you to go and create tomorrow. You're not going to be an innovation superhero. The best that you can do is attempt to break out Innovation Man. Who is Innovation Man? Watch the video.
I am Innovation Man. I'm here to get you all fired up about innovation. Are you fired up? Fired up. Are you fired up? Fired up! I said, are you fired up? Yes! Why are you fired up?
How dare you?
This is an IBM commercial from 10 years ago that is on YouTube if you want to go and see the commercial. This is based on a true story. About 12 years ago now, we were working for a large healthcare company in the United States. They said, what does it take for us to innovate at scale? We said, it's complicated. There's a bunch of stuff you got to do. You got to go and attack all of these things. You need a new strategic direction. You got to change your metrics and so on. They said, that sounds complicated. Isn't there an easier answer? So they removed us as consultant of record and hired a creativity consultant that gave them a seemingly simple answer. The answer they provided was spandex. They suggested that everyone on the top leadership team dress up as their favorite innovation superhero to show the organization it was a new day when it came to innovation. Predictably, this had absolutely no impact. Today, the only thing this company is happy about is 2006, when this happened, was before ubiquitous camera phones. So there's no photographic evidence that this actually happened. There is no innovation superhero that's going to ride to the rescue. If you are truly to unleash all the power inside your organization, you need a different answer. Act 3, the answer. I can't give you a problem without giving you a solution. Let me introduce our latest book, Dual Transformation, which describes our view for how you confront the dilemmas of disruption. The answer is basically in the title of the book. Transformation means a change in form or substance. We're not talking about doing what you are currently doing a little better, a little faster, or a little cheaper. We're talking about a fundamental change. We're talking about a liquid becoming a gas, the organizational equivalent of the caterpillar becoming the butterfly. How do you do that? Well, the answer here is in the dual in the title. We don't suggest that you follow a monolithic change effort where you do one thing. Instead, we suggest that you follow two parallel transformation efforts. The first is what we call Transformation A, where you reposition today's business to make it more resilient. I think the clearest global example of this today is Netflix. I was down in New Zealand a couple months ago giving a talk. I asked people, how many of you subscribe to Netflix? 75% of hands go up. Of course, a decade ago, that would have been unimaginable. Netflix's business at the time was delivering DVDs through the mail. Today, of course, most people who enjoy Netflix are watching streaming videos over the internet. Netflix, of course, has done other things as well, moving from packaging other people's content to selling its own content, allowing it today to be one of the biggest media companies in the world. Now, it hasn't redefined its industry. It's still a media and entertainment company. The end customer is still hiring Netflix to do the same job that it did before, but the way in which it has done it has fundamentally transformed. That's Transformation A. Now, I'm taking, since you are at Google, that you're a pretty smart audience, let me ask you the killer question. If the first part of dual transformation is Transformation A, what do you think the second part is? Transformation B. We only got one person to respond to that, but still, that is the correct answer. Transformation B is where you go and create tomorrow, where you go and take the capabilities that make you special and selectively leverage those to go and build a new growth engine. Of course, this is what Google, as you pull up to the alphabet level, this is what you are trying to do. You're trying to say that we've got a core business or set of core businesses that we're going to run as efficiently, as effectively as possible, and we're going to go and place some bets to bring us into new spaces. This is the new growth engine that has the potential to create the next wave of growth for your organization. There's one more part to the dual transformation equation. Transformation A is repositioning today. Transformation B is creating tomorrow. Note these two circles overlap. The idea that we offer in dual transformation is not unrelated diversification. It's not saying you pick up cash flow from one business and you use it to invest in a completely disconnected business. Instead, we're talking about wading straight into the territory that Christensen famously called the innovator's dilemma and finding a way to very consciously, very carefully link A and B together, where you go and pick up those unique, precious, special assets and break free of that dilemma and use them to do something that few other companies in the world could do. If the only thing you're bringing to the equation is cash flow, it's a very hard game to win in today's fiercely competitive world. There's the basic idea of dual transformation. These are some of the examples that we have in the book and some of the materials we've done around the book. I'm going to give you one of these examples, then I'll ask you to pick another one for me to share with you. So the one I'm going to share is the one that we have in the first chapter of the book. It is Janssen. Anyone know who Janssen is? Pharmaceutical arm of Johnson & Johnson. That's exactly right. So Janssen is a critical part of Johnson & Johnson. It's about $30 billion of J&J's $70 billion global revenue in dollars. So about 10 years ago, the arm was in decline. The unit was in decline. Sales had declined for 2 years in a row. A number of its important drugs were coming off patent. A new leader, Joaquin Duato, launched a dual transformation effort. Transformation A was changing the way that Janssen developed and discovered drugs. Historically, what Janssen did is got the best scientists it could find, put them in a laboratory, and prayed that they would discover some kind of molecule that would ultimately lead to a pharmaceutical drug. They relied on randomness, hope, and hiring the best people they could find. They did two things differently. The first thing they did was to focus. Rather than have people work on anything, they picked a select few number of diseases where they would understand those diseases at a very deep level so they could focus their scientific effort. The second thing they did was to embrace open innovation. There's no way, Janssen thought, that we could possibly have all of the best scientists in the world. So let's get good, let's get great at working with scientists wherever they might be, in research labs, in universities, at startups, and so on. At the beginning of the story, it had the lowest R&D productivity in the industry. Today, it has the highest. It hasn't redefined its industry. It hasn't gone into new markets as it has done this, but it has fundamentally changed the way that it discovers drugs. That's been its transformation A. Janssen today makes $30 billion US selling drugs that allow you to treat and manage disease. What do you think would be disruptive to that? What do you think is Janssen's transformation B? $30 billion treating and managing diseases, pharmaceutical products. What disrupts that business? Prevention. So if you never get diseases, they started a program a few years ago under the name disease interception. The idea was, as we understand the pathogenesis of disease, as we're beginning to have smart connected devices that are giving us in-depth understanding of humans, as we decode the genome, we can create the equivalent of a check engine light for an individual. So it can say, Scott, you think that you're a healthy 43-year-old male, but the light is blinking. We see diabetes in your future. And we've got an answer for you, not a pill, but a program that you can follow that can allow you to intercept this disease before you ever get it. A hugely disruptive idea for Janssen, but one that has tremendous growth potential and one that has the potential to do a lot of good in the world. So that's dual transformation at Janssen. I've got 8 other things on my Brady Bunch. That's probably a reference that's lost on most people in the audience, but there you go. In my Brady Bunch board up here, what else do you want to hear about? Singtel. So Singtel and telecommunications in general is a pretty simple story. So transformation A, broadly speaking, is voice to data. So what you're using your phone for is fundamentally different. That business model and the operational model has fundamentally changed. Transformation B for Singtel has been moving into new spaces, cybersecurity, big data analytics, mobile marketing, over-the-top video, and so on. These businesses today are about $1.5 billion of revenue for Singtel, still a small part of its portfolio, but rapidly growing. And in each case, Singtel is bringing something special to the party. They're not just saying, let's go into markets where we've got no right to play other than our cash flow. Mobile marketing as an example, they have lots of in-depth information about who you are and what you're doing that allows them, through purchases of Adobe and other things, to do some very interesting things in that space. I can do that one so quickly, I'll take one more. What else do you want to hear about? Manila Water. So Manila Water is an interesting example. This is a regulated utility company in Manila, of course, in the Philippines. Transformation A for Manila Water has been moving from providing regulated utility water services in the Metro Manila area to providing essentially water utility as a service to other parts in the Philippines and then Indonesia and Vietnam. The theory being it's gotten so good at operating in markets like that that it can essentially create a business model that allows it to expand beyond Manila into other territories. Transformation B is moving from regulated water to other related services. An example of this is in Metro Manila today, there's about a $30 million business where people will go and get pure water from a Manila water source. They'll go and run it through an ionizer, which does nothing to the water. They'll put it in a big bottle, and they'll sell it at about 1,000% markup. And the target consumer for this is someone who lives in a home that has rusty pipes, so the water that comes out of their tap isn't very good. Manila Water said, we can do this business better than anybody else. It's a very different business, unregulated, et cetera, but it allows Manila Water to take its capabilities and move it in new directions. All right, one more. Say that again. Adobe. So Adobe, I think, is one of the clearest and simplest examples of dual transformation. 10 years ago, again, a business that was essentially flatlining. It had brought its software to seemingly every person who might want to use it. Its share price was stagnant, its sales were stagnant, et cetera. Transformation A, moving from packaged software to software as a service. Still the same software packages, but delivered, of course, all over the cloud. Very different business model. Transformation B, moving from its software solutions to marketing services and analytics, the purchase of Omniture, the big move in this direction. Today, marketing services and analytics is about 45% of Adobe's combined revenue. A stock that had been stagnant has grown at 20% compound annual growth for a decade, which is pretty impressive for a 30-plus-year-old company. So we managed to make it through almost half of the board here. Again, there's other descriptions of this on the web or in other places. But that's the basic idea of dual transformation. Act 4, the leadership implications. The second half of the book describes 4 key behaviors that leaders need to follow to successfully manage dual transformation. Let me go through them pretty quickly. The first is the courage to choose. One of the basic parables in the change management literature is if you want to drive change in an organization, you need a quote-unquote burning platform. This is a very bad metaphor, because if you are literally standing on a burning platform, think about what your strategic choices are. Either you do something incredibly risky by jumping into the ocean and hoping that someone will rescue you, or you stand still and get burnt to a crisp. That's not an attractive set of options. The best leaders have the courage to choose before the platform is on fire. A great example of this is Mark Bertolini at Aetna. Mark Bertolini becomes the CEO of Aetna, a leading health insurance company in the United States, near the end of 2010. There's no burning platform. The business is healthy. Record revenues, record profits. The Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare, had just been passed in the United States. There are 45 million customers that Aetna has to figure out how to serve. It would be incredibly easy for Bertolini to spend the next 5 years executing yesterday's model and ride off into the sunset. He didn't do that. Instead, he made the decision to blow the business up. His theory was health insurance as we know it in the United States is going to die at some point, and I'd rather do it when my business is healthy and I'm not forced to do it, because then I've got degrees of freedom to act differently. If you follow that industry, you know that that company, Aetna, merged with CVS Caremark earlier this year to create a very distinct, maybe even disruptive player in the healthcare industry. Behind Bertolini's thinking is the old John F. Kennedy line, the best time to fix your roof is when the sun is shining. How do you know? How do you get the signals that suggest it's time to change? This is something that many executives struggle with because they say, these are things that are going to happen in the future. How do I know what tomorrow is going to look like today? You can spot tomorrow today if you look in the right places. Remembering the great quote from William Gibson that the future has already arrived, it's just not very evenly distributed. What can show you tomorrow today? What are places that you need to look if you want to understand what the future will look like? Where do you go to go and spot what tomorrow is going to look like? This is, by the way, meant not to be a rhetorical question, but a question where I hear examples from you. What are good signs to show you what the future will look like? What kids are doing. So I mentioned before that I've got kids, and I was going to show you pictures of them. Here's the second child picture. There is my 10-year-old daughter, Holly. Holly is an invaluable source of guidance to me. I sit locally on the board of MediaCorp. If you don't know MediaCorp, it is the leading media company in Singapore. Its dominant business model is broadcasting videos, television channels, linear television, and so on. I watch the way Holly consumes media, and of course you know this exceedingly well at Google, and you know that this model is dying very quickly, and MediaCorp needs to change quickly to adapt, because Holly will never sit down and watch linear television, never. Sometimes I will see her on the couch watching Netflix, but I'm much more likely to see a scene like this. Here's Holly getting ready to go and watch her favorite performer on YouTube, Dantdm. Does anyone know who Dantdm is? No, Dantdm. Usually, you are not of a demographic that would watch Dantdm, but there are a couple in the room that might have kids who watch Dantdm. Well, I'll tell you who Dantdm is. He is a YouTube star. He's got about 20 million followers on YouTube. He narrates himself playing video games, most predominantly himself playing Minecraft. Now, I played video games when I was growing up. I had every video game system known to man, the TRS-80, the Atari 2600, the ColecoVision, the Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, Sega Dreamcast, etc. Lots of video game systems, maybe not so many friends, different conversation, different day. So I get playing them. Watching people narrate them to me is a little bizarre, but Holly and her friends will watch for hours when people are doing this. And again, 20 million followers, reliable press accounts say sponsorship fees of about 20 million British pounds last year. This is what media is going to look like. Kids are great signals of the future. Startups are great signals of the future. Hackers and artists are great signals as well. The picture here is me on stage in a conference in Australia last year with the Cyborg. The cyborg is Neil Harbison. He's in the red jacket on the left side of the screen for me, right side to you. He has an implant in his brain that allows him to perceive different parts of the spectrum. There is an IP address in the implant that allows you to email pictures to him that he can perceive. I was talking to one of his friends, a fellow cyborg at the conference. This friend had implants in his ear that went to a plate in the back of his head. I said, it looks like it's pretty hard to sleep at night. He said, yeah, I don't sleep all that well. I said, so what's the benefit? He said, well, with this, I can sense changes in atmospheric pressure. I was not yet sold, so I asked him, what benefit does that give you? He says, well, I know when it's raining outside. I said, well, I do too. I just look out the window, and I sleep pretty well at night. And this seems kind of weird when you see it in its early days. But of course, things that are fringe today are mainstream tomorrow. So you want to, as a leader, do things like this. Go and spend time at the edge or the periphery of an industry because that will show you tomorrow today. Second thing you then need to demonstrate is the clarity to focus. This is not planting hundreds or thousands of flowers in hopes that some will bloom. This is going and launching, yes, a few select strategic moonshots. This is deciding the things that you will do, and most critically, the things that you won't do as well. Many organizations tell us, we wish that we could do more things when it relates to innovation, but we don't have the resources. We find almost every organization has the resources. Many have succumbed to the plague of the zombie project, the walking undead. The project that, if you are honest about it, will not materially move the growth needle in any major way, yet it still shuffles on, sucking all the energy out of the organization. You need the clarity to focus on both what you will do and what you won't do. How do you go and actually make the decision about what you should and shouldn't do? Well, this is where you face one of the biggest challenges of an innovator. I've been in the field, as I mentioned in the beginning, for close to 20 years. In that time, I've seen hundreds, if not thousands, of ideas to innovate. Every idea in its early days is the same because it's partially right and partially wrong. The challenge you face when you're standing at the first mile of innovation is you don't know which part is which. Now, the way many large companies go and address this challenge is they try to get to truth through analysis. They go and interview experts, and they go and commission market research, and they come up with elaborate financial forecasts in the hopes of coming up with a perfect plan. There is no such thing. You follow this approach, you learn a life lesson taught by the great American philosopher, actor, and occasional boxer Mike Tyson, who once said everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. What you need to demonstrate as a leader is the curiosity to explore, recognizing that your ideas are wrong, and the only way that you will get to truth is through smart, conscious trial and error experimentation. While doing this, you need to defang one of the biggest enemies of innovation, something that's illustrated in a book called How Google Works, so something that I hope resonates with at least some of you, the hippo problem, where decisions are made not by data and not by experiments, but by the highest paid person's opinion. This is a bad example here where option A is replete with data, option B has no data, yet the hippo rules for option B. It's sometimes even worse when it comes to innovation because both sides of the board are blank. And the hippo has great intuition about yesterday, but not great intuition about tomorrow. So what do you do to confront this challenge, to deal with the reality that every idea is partially right and partially wrong? I suggest drawing inspiration from the Wright brothers. You go back 120 years ago, the world was perplexed with the problem. They had wondered for years, for generations, for centuries, why it was that birds could fly but humans couldn't. The problem was particularly acute at this time because the machine age, the Industrial Revolution was upon us, yet we still hadn't cracked the problem. Most would-be aviators built versions of their planes, took them to high places, and tried to fly. Those planes crashed. They couldn't go and try again. The Wright brothers framed the problem fundamentally differently. Before they flew a plane, they built kites and gliders. The great thing about kites and gliders is when they crash, and they always do, nobody gets hurt. Even more critically, in 1902, the Wright brothers hacked together bicycle spoke wire, cardboard box, and a fan to create this, a wind tunnel. Imagine how it felt. At the time, everybody else was working on crazy contraptions that were crashing. And the Wright brothers here were able to, in 2 exhilarating months, to run more than 200 experiments testing 30 different wing designs, getting real data that ultimately led to breakthroughs like wing warping that allowed the Wright brothers to create the world's first flying machine. This is what you need to do at scale in organizations. Have the ability to design, execute, and learn from experiments. This is easier said than done, because the problem is kites still crash, wind tunnels still don't work, there's a lot of failure on the way to success. Now, if you talk to anybody about failure, they'll say something similar to what I'll show in the video clip here. This is from an interview I did with the then CEO of Procter & Gamble, A.G. Lafley, a decade ago, 2008, when I asked him his view on failure. This is what he said.
You learn far more from your failures than you do from your successes. Far more from your failures. I can remember every time I struck out in high school baseball. I can remember every time I failed, okay, at P&G, and I failed a lot. Now what we're trying to do now is fail a lot faster, fail a lot cheaper, so we can fail more and get on to the next idea or the next innovation that may become a commercial success. But failure is incredibly important, and learning from failure is very important.
Again, leaders today are conditioned to say things like this. We love failure, we encourage failure. They cite Google, they cite other examples in Silicon Valley about how failure is almost a badge of honor. But then you get the reality, where you get something like this. This is Tom Fishburne, the same cartoonist who did the hippo problem. If you don't follow Tom, you absolutely should. He does great illustrations that bring business challenges to life. What breakthrough idea did you want to share with me? This is what happened to everyone who failed beforehand. This is a huge challenge in organizations. What do you do to combat it? You make sure that people recognize it's okay to dare to try. This is a consciously stolen name. This is a high prestige prize that's given out by Tata Sons, the largest conglomerate in India, every couple years. There are two and only two things that you need to do to be eligible for the Dare to Try prize. What do you think they are? Two things. You have to have failed, and this is not a heroic overcoming an obstacle and still succeeding. I remember I was talking to one organization in Singapore, and I said, do you encourage failure? They said, we absolutely do. I said, give me one example of when you've done this. They said, well, this team was really struggling. It was not hitting any of its deadlines. It was running over budget. And then they worked really hard, 3 months, nights, weekends, and they delivered. I said, there is no failure in this. This is heroically overcoming obstacles. Let me give you an example of failure. About 10 years ago, we had an idea. We would create CD-ROMs. This would not be me singing. Thankfully, again, we avoid that. But the idea was we would take Clay Christensen, we'd take me, we'd take other people in our organization. We would create CDs that had training material. And people would buy these CDs. And this would be a new growth business for our company. If anyone would like a large amount of CDs, we still have them in our inventory. There's no happy ending to this story. It didn't work. We've got Christmas presents to give out for years to come still. That's the first criteria. It has to have failed. What's the second? The idea must have failed, but, /and, you have to have learned something from it. Because anytime you dare to try, there are three good things that could happen. You can learn, we should never do that again. And if you learn that in a resource-effective way, that's a good, not bad outcome. You can learn that we should only do this if you've generated a strategic option that gives you space to work in the future. Or, most powerfully, in many organizations, this is their entire origin story, you learn that instead of doing that, we should do something completely different. These are all valuable learnings that you want to capture and codify when you go and do new things. Final leadership characteristic, I'll do this, then I'll give you my short version of the fifth act, then I'll open it up for questions, is the conviction to persevere. My co-author, Clark Gilbert, second name you see listed up there, speaks from firsthand experience when he says, what I've described here is the toughest challenge a leader will ever face. He's done this in two very different organizations, a media organization and a university. And it is indeed incredibly hard. In the 8th chapter of Dual Transformation, we lay out some of the predictable crises that will happen as you try to do this. You won't get this done in a month or in a quarter. It's going to be a multi-year journey. And in that journey, you're going to have crises of commitment. You're going to have crises of conflict. The new business and the old business will fight for resources. You will have conflict of identity. It happens every single time. You need to have, as a leader, the conviction to persevere through these conflicts, or the first time you hit one of these crises, all of your efforts will crumble. Let's go back to Johnson & Johnson for a second. The picture you see here is the cover of Dual Transformation in front of the Credo. The Credo is etched into granite in the headquarters of Johnson & Johnson in New Brunswick, New Jersey. You could imagine people in J&J would say, disease interception, that is crazy. We make $30 billion a year selling products that allow people to treat diseases. Why would we want to eradicate diseases? This isn't in our shareholders' best interest. Well, at J&J, these are very short discussions because you point to the Credo. The Credo starts by saying our first responsibility is to the doctors, the nurses, the patients, the mothers and fathers, and everybody else who uses our products and services. It goes on to say that we then have to think about our employees. We then have to think about the communities in which we live. And our final responsibility is to our shareholders, who, if we do all of these things, have the right to get a fair return. The shareholder isn't first. The shareholder is last. The conviction to persevere must be grounded in some kind of purpose for why you're doing it. You can find purpose in just about everything. There's a great example from about 20 years ago in Singapore about an organization that had a seemingly strange problem. It had too many repeat customers, and because it had so many repeat customers, its employees were very unhappy. What type of organization do you think this is? Where do you not want repeat customers? Say that again? Prison is correct. I sometimes will have people say healthcare. Every once in a while will have people say funeral homes. This is not the zombie apocalypse. It is indeed prisons. So there were high rates of recidivism, and because of that, the guards were very unhappy. So a new leader comes in and does many things, but one of the things he does is create a new statement of purpose. We are captains in the lives of people who are temporarily in our custody. Our goal is to get them out as quickly as possible and have them stay out for as long as possible. Today, some of the lowest rates of recidivism in the world, some of the highest rates of job satisfaction in the world. This is what's required if you are to drive fundamental change in organizations. Fifth act, fifth and final act, the call to action. This is the greatest present that I ever received from a project team, a consultant team that was working for me. This is a bobblehead doll affectionately known as Skoda. This is my head grafted on the body of the Star Wars character Yoda. The team told me they were going to try and hit a deliverable, and I told them this is not a try or try not situation. This is a do or do not situation. If you are to do any of the things that we talked about here, you have to go and do it. By way of metaphor, let me introduce my third child into the discussion. My oldest child, my boy Charlie, a few years ago said he wanted to learn to ride a bike. What came next? We did not discuss the theory of bike riding. We did not watch any YouTube videos about bike riding. We created no PowerPoint slides. We did no spreadsheets modeling bike riding. Instead, we put Charlie on a bike and he tried. He pedaled and he fell down. He got back up. He eventually learned how to ride a bike. Today, he's a proficient rider. He can get from point A to point B without too much difficulty. He practices enough, he can be a skilled rider. He takes performance-enhancing drugs. The Tour de France might be in his future. Don't do drugs, they're very bad things. You've got to do the same thing to bring to life many of the things we talked about during today's conversation. It starts with the declaration of innovation. Remember what I said earlier, we enter the world in a natural state. Human beings are by their very nature curious, creative people that desire to grow. This is innate inside all of us. There are 7 specific, simple things that you can do to begin to make some of the things I've talked about here day-to-day habits. It starts by tripling the amount of time you spend with customers. However much time you're spending today, it is not enough. There's no get-out-of-jail-free card for this. You can't say, well, I'm in an internal support role. I don't have any customers. Everybody has people they're trying to serve. It might be a colleague. It might be a coworker. What your job is to identify or understand them better than they understand themselves so you can spot new paths to innovation. Second, triple the amount of time that you spend at the periphery. Remember, the future has already arrived. It's just not very evenly distributed. The more time you spend at the edges with children, with hackers, with startups, the more you will be able to see tomorrow today. Third, make a regular habit of asking 3 simple questions that will highlight new opportunities for innovation. Why? Why not? And what if? Fourth, prepare yourself to take those punches from Mike Tyson. Run an experiment a day. It doesn't have to be complicated. It can be a new route into work or a change in your morning routine. If you're struggling with an innovation problem, this is a great way to condition yourself to go and try new experiments and do new things. Don't let a lack of money be an excuse. Find ways to experiment without spending anything. Think about the wind tunnel. Think about those people who started the business at Plunify. There is a ton you can do today without spending any money at all. The final 2 tips remind you to go to the place where innovation magic always happens. This is one of the most persistent findings you see in the innovation literature. Magic happens at intersections, where different mindsets and skills collide together. A simple way to get to the intersections is to read a magazine in a field you've never thought of before, or go to a trade show in an industry that you don't care at all about. If you've got an innovation puzzle in your brain, you're going to see a unique way to address it if you go and do this. Finally, call up the weirdest, most iconoclastic person you know. Ask them to introduce you to the weirdest person that they know. If it's you, you've got a short phone catch-up, but otherwise you have diversified your network for innovation. You've got new sources to lean into when the next disruptive problem arises. I end all of this on a note of optimism. I showed you pictures of 3 of my kids as we went through the discussion. Here they are live and on stage, not quite live and on stage, but there you go. This is not the BBC video. No one's going to run behind me. We've got Charlie, my 12-year-old. We've got Holly, now 10. We've got Harry, who's 6. Here's the newest addition. There's Teddy. He's 2. I don't have any stories about him other than thinking he's awfully cute, so I put him up on the picture here. But what these 4 children have taught me is this lesson that I've repeated here, that we enter the world as curious, creative people. And I now have a firm belief that the world's biggest untapped source of energy isn't in the wind, it isn't in the water, it isn't in the sun. It's inside our large organizations that are filled with human beings that were once like this, that are now shackled and constrained, and not realizing their full potential related to curiosity and creativity. This is my life's mission. I view my job as a parent to make sure that my children never lose their love of learning. I view my job as an advisor to large organizations to help leaders of these organizations release, harness, and amplify the latent energy that exists within. After all, as Archimedes once said, you give me a lever long enough and a platform on which to place it, and I can move the world. The platform that you have at your organization, the platform that people have at many large organizations, is unbelievable. It's the sort of thing that the startups are all fighting like crazy to create. The potential is there. I hope the ideas that I've shared today, the ideas that are documented in some of the other writings that I and my colleagues have done, I hope they make your lever just a little bit stronger. The rest, of course, is up to you. Thank you very much, and good luck. While the mic is going to you, I will tell you about my favorite Harvard Business Review article from the last year. I don't know if you've seen it. I'm reflecting on the fact that we're both Scots. There was an article in the Harvard Business Review that says you essentially become what your name is. So they ran this research study that showed people randomized pictures, and they were able to, at a statistically meaningful level, guess somebody's name. So they'd show 4 pictures, they say that's a Scot, and that's a J, and that's a whatever. So I know someone who's a Scot. I can tell the years that they were born between because the name went like this, and I know roughly what they're going to look like. So anyway.
Well, I was just curious to find out the epilogue to Harry's vandalism story and what kind of lessons he learned and you learned from that, and maybe the Condo Management Association as well.
Yeah, so it's an interesting story. So I don't fault the people who sent the letter, because they were doing what they thought they were supposed to do. And you get the theory, right? It's the broken windows theory. So if we stop the small stuff, the big stuff will never happen. And what we talked about with Harry is, yes, there are certain circumstances or certain things that you would do that would be problematic. So if you spray painted rather than chalk, if what you wrote were religiously offensive, slow, or whatever, there's certain sets of things that you shouldn't do, but free play by children with material that washes away easily is not the sort of thing we're trying to constrain. And I've now used this story to talk to people in the Singapore government, because in my view, this is Singapore's biggest problem. Singapore is a remarkable place. You see that which has been created out of basically nothing, but all the constraints that exist in the system take the human population and human capabilities and really, in today's quickly changing world, I think constrain them. So I think Singapore's challenge/opportunity is to go and not arrest, put in jail, but to go and fight against some of the historical legacy systems that lead to this being the norm. And Harry is as creative and curious and crazy as ever. He now doesn't think he's from Mars anymore. Neptune is his new home. That's what he said this morning.
Thank you. Thanks for the talk. My name's Ignatius. I'm not sure what I'd become, but My question was, if we're meant to triple the time we spend with customers and on the periphery, what would be your advice as to what we should spend less time doing?
Not coming to talks like this. But I was talking to Jay about this before. That this gets back to the idea of inertia being one of the biggest enemies that you face, any organization faces. I bet you that a large portion of the meetings that you go to, a large portion of the things that you're spending your time on, if you were to step back and say, is this something that is material, is value added, and so on, I bet you the answer would be no. I bet you that you've got zombie things that are on your calendar. And the example I was sharing was our organization, we've got a call every Thursday. We call it a leadership team call. Our organization is about 100 people inside a larger organization, but within the 100 people, about 30 of those 100 join the call, so it's a pretty big part of the organization that does it. And if you ask people, why do we have this call Thursday at 8 a.m. Eastern time, most people would say, because it's always been on the calendar. And I was there when we created the call, and I know why we created it, but it was created to solve a problem that no longer exists. But we still just dutifully, religiously go to this meeting, even if it wastes a lot of people's time. So I would ask, what is the equivalent of your Thursday call that you could get rid of to go and create the space for it? And I'm sure it's there. Or you should just work harder, either one.
Hello, my name is George. So my question is because over the years, I think a lot of companies, the traditional enterprise, they're talking about like the transformation or the digital transformation. This has been the concept has been around like for many years, and some companies have been successful over the journey, right? Some companies have been not so successful. So based on your observation, so what are some of the top like traits for those like so-called successful transformational companies, and what are some of the things you think companies are not doing so well in their journeys, like potentially people can learn from them? Yeah.
So I would say read the book, because the book is an effort to answer that as much as we can. But I think if you look at the most common challenges that people run into, one is they define it too narrowly. So they're not looking at the A and B. They're doing an A or a B. And doing just one of those is insufficient. If all you're doing is A, you're missing tomorrow's great growth businesses. If all you're doing is B, you're leaving your core business in a place where someone's going to come and attack it, and that's a problem. So often we see people who do it too narrowly. That's one challenge. The second challenge we see is this capabilities link that I went through very quickly. This is really hard. It's very tricky. It's very subtle. We've got a full chapter in the book devoted to it. We talk a lot about Clark and his experiences at his media organization and his university. Getting that right, thinking about how you very selectively pick the capabilities you want to leverage. You make sure you don't take some things that will corrupt your new business, even though they're great for your current business. You don't want, that's a really hard thing to do. So that's a common failure mechanism. And the third is they don't recognize it's a journey. Rather than viewing it as a journey, they say, okay, this is our 90-day plan to go and transform. It doesn't happen. We have the metaphor in the book of a 3-year journey. It might not be 3, it might be 18 months, but it might be 5 years in some cases. And the impatience in organizations, I think, is a big challenge. There's lots of other things you could talk about strategy and so on, but those would be at least 3 places that I would start, and 3 things that we try to offer different answers to in the book.
You know, at Google, for instance, we tend to come in and offer these sort of point solutions, and I'm sorry if this question is a bit leading, but you know, what is it that a company like Google should be doing whenever we're talking to our customers, rather than just offering them point solutions whenever they are trying to make a change, a fundamental change in their business and how they approach things?
Yeah, so if you look at that idea of tripling the amount of time you spend with customers, if you know Innosight at all, you know Clayton Christensen and his writings, you know one of the big ideas we focus on is the customer's job to be done. What is the problem they're trying to solve? And in a B2B world, it's pretty simple along some dimensions. The business of business is business. So what you always want to do when you're in a service provider space, where you're in a B2B space, is understand the context in which your customers operate and think not just about how you deliver a cloud install or whatever, but what's the business context in which they're operating? What are the challenges they're facing? What are the other things that need to happen for them to increase their ability to be competitive, to engage employees, et cetera, et cetera? So this mindset of always asking yourself, what actually is the customer's job to be done? And not just the one who I'm having the conversation with, not just the buyer, but what's the buyer, what is the circumstance in which they sit, and who are the other influencers, et cetera, et cetera. That's, I think, the mindset that you always need to have. And I think it's not dissimilar to what we need to think about to be good advisors to companies. So we might get hired by an executive who says, I need to think about this new growth business or whatever, but what they actually need to do is have a story that they can tell to a shareholder, or they might have a board of directors member that's causing them a lot of trouble, or they might have a power struggle that they're trying to, whatever. We need to understand that, because giving the right technical answer to the question asked is typically insufficient to ultimately have impact in your line of business, in our line of business as well.
I'll ask 2 more questions that were submitted as part of the survey that we provided earlier. One of them was, can I start a business with $0?
Yeah, so the Plunify example is a perfect example of that. And if you looked at the screen, it was the excited space of cloud-accelerated chip design. I do not remember at all what that is, but whatever. That was a business that was started for nothing, and this is the norm today. A lot of businesses are started for nothing. And of course, there are lots of businesses that you could do as an individual that require no capital investment. Starting a business for nothing is actually quite trivial to do. Scaling it, on the other hand, that still requires capital. And this, again, is one of the great advantages a company like Google has. You have more capital than probably any company in the Western world. So that gives you advantages over startups that are scarce of capital and have to fight fiercely and have to fight against would-be competitors, et cetera, et cetera. You have the ability to think and act at a scale that few other organizations can follow. So yes, you can start a business for nothing, but remember, so can everybody else in the room. So if you got an idea and you start to get some early traction, then everybody else is going to go and try and do the same thing. Whereas here at Google, you've got unique, hard-earned assets that you built over your 20-plus year history that are really difficult to replicate. And think about what you can do with that as an advantage. It's the example or the idea of having both. So you both have the assets of scale and the entrepreneurial energy. When you bring the two of those things together, it is a really powerful combination.
Okay, and I guess that takes me into one of the other questions that was asked. For those of us then have made that choice to join a large organization and try to change the world, what can we do as individuals to innovate inside of our own roles in companies?
Yeah, so the 7 things that I had on, this is from the list of 7 things, is a slightly modified version of something that I had at the end of the little black book of innovation called the Innovator's Pledge. Doing those things repeatedly, spending more time with customers, spending more time at the periphery, running experiments, and so on. You don't have to be a CEO or somebody who's got a big budget or runs a business unit to do it. These are day-to-day habits that you can bring into your own individual behavior, to your team's individual behavior. And the thing that I'd ask you to think about if this is a struggle for your team, group, or department is why. Well, what are the things, the blockers that are standing in the way of success? Sometimes it's a norm that needs to be changed. Sometimes it's a system that needs to be changed. Sometimes it's you as a leader, what you need to do differently in order to role model a different behavior. But it all starts with going and recognizing that to do something different that creates value, which is how we define innovation, there are a set of practices, there are a set of habits that increase the odds of success. So we just got to do those things, and we got to do them repeatedly. And we have to enable other people in our team, group, or department to do those things as well.
Let's have a round of applause for Scott Anthony.
Thank you.